Welcome to episode 2 of the Virtual Excellence Show, live. I am Ross Dawson, a futurist, keynote speaker, and strategy facilitator, and also the producer and host of the Virtual Excellence Show. Coming up very soon, a conversation with the amazing John Hagel, one of the most influential and insightful people in the world on the future of organizations. And we'll get to that very soon. So just 1 week ago now, we had the first episode of the show, which featuring a fabulous conversation with Howard Rheingold, arguably the granddaddy of virtual communities, who shared some fabulous insights. It's also safe to say that we learned a lot during the first episode, including from some technical and production problems. So in the spirit of learning virtual excellence together, we posted a short video yesterday on the lessons we learned. If you'd like to see the first show with Howard or the lessons learned video, please go to our website, thevx.show, to access our channel on YouTube or our previous episodes or to participate, including on our suggestions form by adding suggestions. So the most important lesson we learned was not to try to pack too much into our weekly live shows. From now on, these will be focused on conversations with amazing people. And the reason to have these conversations live is so that we can broaden them, have you involved with that. So we'll try different ways to get participation and see what works best. Today, we'll use the hashtag #VXShow on Twitter. So please share your comments and questions on Twitter using the hashtag, and we'll try to respond to those. And if you're not on Twitter, you can go to our Facebook page or the discussion on thevx.show. So we're just getting going, so if you'd like what we're doing, please help us by subscribing to the channel, like our videos. That will help us continue our exploration of excellence in all things virtual. So keep in touch on the channel and the website. We'll be sharing weekly conversations with awesome people and also lots of shorter videos and resources, including tutorials, insights, lessons learned, and more. So now to the reason you're here, a conversation with the extremely insightful John Hagel. So John has been helping major organizations succeed for several decades. He founded and was global leader for what was the e-commerce practice for McKinsey's back in 1993, so a little ahead of most other people. He then worked independently and set up some startups. And he also, since 2007, has been the co-chair of Deloitte Center for the Edge, as well as authoring a number of really insightful books that we'll touch on. He shares extensively on his website, johnhagel.com, a wonderful blogger for a long time now, always worth reading, and also his Twitter, jhagel, well worth doing. So please welcome John Hagel.
Hey there, how are you?
Wonderful, thank you.
Excellent.
So, first of all, how are you? I mean, what's life like for you during the pandemic?
All things considered, about as good as it could be. I'm staying physically isolated and healthy, but in some respects more connected than ever. So it's
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the. It's interesting for those like you and I and many others who have been connected in these ways for a long time. It just seems totally normal. We're used to it. Others, it's very new. So there's been, I think, some organizations and some people being ahead of the curve in this phase.
Absolutely. No, it's been a learning process for many people and many companies to realize that physical isolation doesn't mean social isolation, and that you can actually be more connected when you're physically isolated. So, yeah.
So one of the themes is of virtual excellence is virtual organizations, and I suppose any successful organization has been significantly virtual. Some have obviously some are completely virtual, some automatic and TopTal and other great examples of those, and others are somewhat virtual. All the big tech companies, of course, virtualize, become location independent in various ways. So interested in how you see where we are now in terms of that playing out. Does that mean there's just catch up for everyone else? What is it they need to do to become more virtual, since that's what they need to do in a world of social isolation? How do you see that?
Well, I think it'll be an interesting experiment to see how companies respond. I'd say in general, they're certainly seeing much more potential to connect virtually. On the other side, I would say that I see them viewing virtual connection as just doing what they've always done faster and cheaper, right? So one of the things I hear now about this notion of working from home is the realization that, hey, we can save a ton of money on office space. You know, we don't need to have as many offices or as big offices as we've had. But no, very few companies are asking the question, what could the work be in remotely and virtually versus are we just doing the same work at a distance via the internet? And I think going to the more fundamental question of how can we rethink all our activities and the way we connect with people outside our companies and provide more value or different value is really where the opportunity is versus just thinking about this as doing what we've always done faster and cheaper.
So, how are you helping leaders understand this better? And so I guess, this, I suppose we're in a community who understands these issues, but as you say, only some organizations are there, others are on the journey. How is it that you can assist them to, I suppose, get in motion along that path? Or
in my experience, the key to driving change is to focus on opportunity versus threat or challenge. I mean, I think there's one approach which says the world is changing. If you don't change, you're going to die, or the burning platform kind of model. I believe that actually, in general, will increase resistance to change. It builds up fear, it fosters fear, and the natural reaction when you're afraid is to just resist and hold on to what you have. My belief is the way to motivate people to change and take more risk is to focus on the big opportunity. One of the ways we have of representing the big shift, as we describe it, which is the way the global economy is transforming itself, and it's been playing out for decades, is that it's creating exponential opportunity. We can create far more value with far less resource, far more quickly than would have ever been imaginable. And really focusing executives on how can we harness this virtual capability to do that is really where the opportunity is, but it requires fundamentally rethinking what you're doing because you're not creating as much value today.
Yes, and I think that exponential piece you mentioned ties well. I think seems to me your central theme for a few years has been scalable learning, and so I want to hear about that. But I suppose particularly in a virtual context, to me, this idea of scalable learning, of course, has to be virtual. If you can't just sort of cram people in a bunch of classrooms or proximity to learn. So how do we build scalable learning, and what's the role of, I suppose, virtual or virtualization of organizations in that?
A very multidimensional topic there. I would just say as a generalization that, again, in the context of this view of the big shift, one way we have of representing the big shift is we're moving from an institutional model which has been driven by scalable efficiency, where success as an institution hinges on becoming more and more efficient at scale, to an institutional model of scalable learning, where the key to success and to thriving is learning faster. But in that context, I would hasten to add, when I talk to executives about learning, I quickly get the answer, oh, we do learning. We have training programs. Yeah. No. In a world that's rapidly changing, the most powerful and necessary form of learning is not transferring existing knowledge through training programs. It's creating entirely new knowledge as you confront new situations and act in those situations and learn through the action. And that's where the learning of in the form of creating new knowledge occurs. It's in the workplace, not in a training program, not even with virtual training. It's by, first of all, seeing problems and opportunities that nobody's seen before, and developing approaches to addressing those, and learning as you go through those approaches. And just another key point in all this is we've come to believe, and we've done quite a bit of research on this, that no matter how smart you are as an individual, you're going to learn a lot faster in terms of creating new knowledge if you're working as part of a small group of people. Typically, it's 5 to 15 people, where you can challenge each other, reach out and ask for help from each other, and come up with really new approaches to creating much more value in whatever context you're in. And that's where we think the real opportunity is in scalable learning. And then the other piece, just to add to it, is scalability. One of my favorite quotes is a Silicon Valley entrepreneur by the name of Bill Joy, who once said, he said, look, no matter how many smart people you have within your organization, just remember one thing: there are a lot more smart people outside your organization than inside. So if you're serious about scalable learning, you need to find ways to connect to a broader and more diverse range of expertise and capability wherever it resides, geographically or institutionally. It's about connecting and learning together.
Yes. I mean, there's a few things of shared history coming up for me. First was just back from the 90s. You have to remind people still the distinction between knowledge and information. So knowledge is being the capacity to act, and the networks is fundamental. The networks within organizations, the networks outside organizations, and those are, of course, be able to be physically together builds the trust, which enables that collaboration and mutual value knowledge creation. But you have to be connected. So before we move on, I mean, just want to come back to this. I mean, are there any anecdotes you can tell around getting, or successfully or unsuccessfully getting, leaders or organizations to where the light switch on and they understand the essential of this connection and the networks and the expansion and how those enable learning and scalability?
I think a lot of it has to do, I talk about the paradox of the big shift, that on the one side, it's creating exponentially expanding opportunity. And on the other side, it's creating mounting performance pressure on all of us. Competition is intensifying, pace of change is accelerating, extreme events come in out of nowhere and disrupt our best laid plans. Witness what's happening today. And so in that context, I think executives, leaders of companies are feeling more and more pressure for performance. And the key is focusing them again on opportunity. And one of the ways we find that can be very helpful right now is because a lot of companies are under pressure to show growth. It's not just profitability, although even in today's situation, profitability is important. But how do you show more growth? And the notion of being able to use virtual connections to find ways to connect with more third parties that can add value to your customers and capture some of that value for yourself, that's a huge opportunity to create much more growth with less resource, more quickly. And by the way, don't just connect in transactions, connect so that you all can learn together how to deliver even more value to the customer. That's a big opportunity. And that gets some attention, is this notion of we can grow with less resource. Tell me more.
Yes, it's. Have you seen any differences globally around sort of what's? I mean, obviously, you particularly see U.S. perspective, but also internationally. Is there any places? Is U.S. far ahead in terms of this updating, taking these approaches, or others, China, or where?
Actually, just a quick story is I first went to China in 1982 And I came back starting to talk about what was going on over there, and I would get dismissed. But in the US, they would say, wait a minute, there's no intellectual property protection. So even if they come up with some creative new ideas, it's going to get copied immediately. And there's very little venture capital or funding for new entrepreneurial ventures, so they don't have the resources anyway. I think those two weaknesses or challenges ended up framing a very different approach. And in my view, the companies that are most sophisticated in the approaches to scalable learning are actually in China and India, not in the US or in Western economies. And it's because, A, they had very little resource to begin with. So they had to be very relentless about how many, where and how can we rely on others to provide things we need versus doing it all ourselves because we don't have the resources to do it. And because we don't have intellectual property protection, we can't rest. If we come up with a creative new idea, great. But what's next? And how quickly can we come up with that? And so it fostered this culture of scalable learning, basically reaching out, connecting to a large number of participants and learning faster together.
So I want to come back to some of your earlier work. And one of the things which I found, which I sort of piggybacked on and found very, exceptionally insightful, was around the modular economy. And yeah, this wonderful example of Chongqing in China, and they use that for motorcycle assembly as a modular economy. And so this also to me, harks back to out of the box and the web services. And well, in fact, you were actually instrumental in that whole phase. And so now we use different names around it, but essentially it's modular distributed technology, modular distributed value creation. So just want to get now in the sort of everyone's talking virtual, though it's not new. I mean, how do you see those concepts of the modular economy playing out now and into this decade?
I think it's going to become increasingly important. I believe, while I was talking about it for quite a while and over a decade ago, I'm going to generalize, in most large companies today around the world, large institutions in general, they still have very tightly coupled, rigid architectures. And it's, again, in the name of scalable efficiency. To be more efficient, we need to tightly specify every activity, ensure that it's done in the same standard way everywhere in the organization. And if we connect out to other companies, it's in, the term value chain, and that's a very real metaphor. It's a chain, it's tightly linked, and you can't really mess with it. And what we're finding in the world today with this unexpected crisis is those value chains, while they were very efficient in more stable times, are actually very fragile and brittle. And when unexpected things happen, now there's a need to really rethink and go to what I would describe as value networks, which are much more modular and where there is an ability to quickly adapt and respond to situations and learn together. That's a very different mindset, and I think it's contradicting the architectures that still drive most of our large institutions around the world.
Yes, and it's been a long. You and I have had similar conversations for a couple of decades, and I guess my observation, we've come a long way, as in more leaders, more organizations. We've got lovely examples, more and more examples that we can use around that. But you're saying that it's still, we've only come a fraction of the way to how this is going to play out?
I'm driven by passion and very impatient, and yes, there's been some progress, but it's a fraction of the progress that I think we could and need to make in order to really harness the potential of these modular architectures that can create much more flexibility, but even more importantly, much faster learning by connecting people in much richer and broader ways so they can learn faster together.
So just going back to one of the other themes, and I've asked you about this before, but in Net Gain, I think it was in 1997, you talked about intermediaries. And this idea of something between consumers who would then have structures to allow access to data about them in exchange for value. And so I, at the time, thought this was enormously prescient and was really very likely to happen in some form, yet it really hasn't much, though there's been lots of endeavors, particularly in the last 3, 4, 5 years, that are pushing the edge a little bit further with that. So I think this, again, a virtual world, of course, now consumers and the providers of services and products are all we're all dealing essentially virtually. So how is it, in terms of that relationship between individuals and organizations that sell to us, that we might or could have this intermediary or other ways to give us power? Have we lost our power forever? Or can we connect back in to have some structures to give power to the individuals in that data relationship?
Yeah, I'm an optimist on this. I should clarify, my book Net Gain was in 1997. That was on virtual communities, and a little bit ahead of my time then. Howard Rheingold and I were some of the early evangelists for virtual communities. But then 1999 was Net Worth, which was really this intermediary opportunity. And I think it's still an opportunity that has yet to be realized. I think there's a growing need in the sense of, on the one side, one of the things we're seeing in the global economy is fragmentation of products and services. We have more and more products and services that are being made available, and they can be accessed because of virtual connections anywhere in the world. And so the great news is we have more choice as customers. The bad news is that's kind of overwhelming. There's so much, and it's so rapidly evolving that who can invest the time required to really pick the best choices? And I think that's where this intermediary opportunity comes in. I call it also a trusted advisor, somebody who gets to know us extremely well and that we can trust to actually provide us with advice in terms of what resources and products to connect with that will give us the most value. And that's a big unmet need out there, and I think something that increasingly, partly because another trend that's been playing out since I wrote that book, but I think increases the need for this, is erosion of trust in all of our institutions around the world.
Yes.
If you look at any surveys, and it's not just companies, it's governments, it's education, but trust is eroding. So there's an opening there, an unmet need. If somebody can come in and build that trust, and part of it, the trust is, first of all, I'm not going to have products and services of my own to offer you, because if all I'm doing is recommending my products to you, guess what? I don't trust you. I know whose interests you're serving. So it has to be some company that doesn't have its own products and services, and which is really paid by the customer too. Again, if it's advertising based or commission based, I don't trust you. I know who's paying the bill, and it's not me. So the trusted advisor model is where the customer pays. Now that I'm paying the bill, I know whose interests you're going to have to serve.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, this relates very strongly to my thesis of knowledge-based client relationships, or little adaptation knowledge-based customer relationships. The ones who know their customers or clients the best will be the ones that have the power to give them more value. So,
and I would just say too, I think there's a virtuous cycle here where the more trust you have with the customer, the more willing the customer is to share more data about themselves, right? The more data they share with you, the more value you can provide back to them, and it becomes a really virtuous cycle.
Yeah, I've got this little diagram from my book about the virtuous cycle, which is exactly that. The more you can demonstrate that you can create value from that knowledge, the more you're willing to share. And that's right. Relevant across every domain.
Huge opportunity.
So virtual excellence. And so I want to sort of begin to sort of close out here, but there's a journey. I mean, as we start off by saying, the minority of organizations are really even understanding the framework here. And there's a whole world of things that to be done. But in terms of organizations saying, all right, well, we live in a virtual world, we need to, not necessarily become virtual organizations per se, but to take advantage of that, to use that for scalability, use that for learning. So what is your high-level advice? What are the things that leaders need to be working on to shift, succeed in a world where virtual excellence will prevail?
It's a huge challenge because, again, I think the issue is not just going virtual, it's rethinking everything you do as a result of those virtual capabilities. So it's not just doing what we've always done virtually. And in that context, that can be very challenging. It can be overwhelming. It can excite. One of the things I talk about a lot is never ever underestimate the power of the immune system that exists in every large organization and will mobilize at a moment's notice to crush any efforts to change. And I think in that context, the key is to be very targeted in the early stages in terms of your initiatives to move to virtual excellence. Find an area in the company where a small move smartly made could really make a big difference to the overall company. And we have a framework we call metrics that matter that can help executives to start with very high-level financial issues for the company and drill down to a very specific set of work groups within the company where if you could inculcate in them the practices that are really required for scalable learning and virtual environments, you could make a huge difference on the overall company and start to draw others into it because they would see the improvement in performance that's occurring over there. How can I be part of that? And it pulls people in to want to embrace this new approach versus, again, I wrote the book, The Power of Pull. It's all about rather than pushing down and trying to drive, massive change from the top, it's how can you create that inspiration and motivation to want to join and pull people into this effort versus pushing it onto them.
Yeah. It's a journey, and so one of the things I'm happiest about is that you're leading that in terms of trying to rattle cages and get leaders along, and in a position of institutional authority as co-chair of Deloitte Center for the Edge. And I think that's part of what's needed is that that leaders are given somebody like you who understands them, who can believe them and take them on that journey. So delighted with what you are doing. There's a lot to do still and be able to take that, but I do believe these are times of opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. Exponential opportunity.
Thank you so much for your time, John. It's been a delight. I've learned so much from you. So thank you for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day and hope to speak again soon.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to reconnect for sure.
So, wrapping up now after that insightful conversation with John. We're going to weekly have our shows up. So at these times on YouTube. Same time every week, we'll have a conversation with somebody amazing. We'll tell you soon who our special guest is for next week. In the meantime, just go to our website, the vx.show. We'll be to access this episode afterwards, to put in your thoughts on Facebook or the Twitter hashtag or submissions and so on. And we'll start, in addition to those weekly shows, we'll also have some other little short clips, tutorials and things like that. This is an experiment. We're learning along the way. And wonderful to have you on the journey. So thank you for being here. And look forward to helping you create your world of virtual excellence.